Thanks to the school for students and people for inviting me. Every time I have to give a lecture, I always feel like it's an exciting moment for me too, because I get a little bit of a chance to reconsider some of the things I've done and try to find a new context or reacquaint myself with the context in which I created those things or whatever. So I'm going to give this lecture. The lecture kind of details a little bit about how I work, which I think is a kind of important piece to the puzzle. And then I'm going to go through some patterns of content, things that reoccurring themes in the work. And then I'll break down a couple of bodies of work, and then I'll try to wrap it up. I'm going to probably go too fast, because sometimes I find it boring. Hopefully you won't as much as I do. My work derives a lot from drawing, almost completely begins with drawing. And I find, for me, what's interesting about drawing is that it can happen at many different speeds and at many different qualities, but that they all kind of have the same equality, and that you have always the equal chance of making a good or bad drawing. And so what I do a lot of times is make hundreds of drawings, and through those drawings, a lot of times I will end up making severe edits. And from those edits, a lot of times I end up making a sculpture, and then I edit the series of drawings sometimes to make a show or something like that. But I think, to me, I think a lot of times people think that you can draw from life, or you can draw from your imagination. But I kind of consider the kind of mark making that I do to have its basis more in the muscles, and that a lot of times I believe that I was willing myself to make certain kinds of drawings or certain kinds of representations based on taking drugs or listening to music, or just wanting to have some sort of creative impulse. But as time has gone on, I've realized that there's almost appears to be a certain kind of thing in my fingertips, or something that compels me to make certain kinds of imagery, and to kind of have been repeating those kinds of imagery over the years that I've been working. I feel that creativity is often a kind of sexual in its nature, or I guess you could think of it also maybe as a hunger, and that it's something that, for me personally, I guess at least I feel like it needs to be satisfied, maybe in the same way that somebody might decide they want to have sex or masturbate, that you have to kind of get this thing out of you or experience it. And so for me, drawing isn't something that I'm necessarily doing every day, but that there are certain times when I feel the need to draw and feel compelled to collaborate with the flame of my creativity. I wanted to kind of show you how the process of drawing creates sculpture. Over the time that I've been making work, I guess you could divide my work into two different styles of working. I've chosen not to do that anymore, but these are some older works, and I wanted to show you how they came into being through the process of drawing. So this is the sculpture, and a lot of times the sculpture can be composed of a lot of different drawings that came maybe from different times, sometimes even different years. But those drawings that were compelling to me that I set aside, a lot of times I edit them into one sculpture. So from that piece, you can see here this black hand that has fingertips falling off is in this sculpture. These two pencils that were from another drawing got combined with this weird vaginal shape on these logs. And this drawing of a piece of a Cadillac with a vagina dentata on top of it. And then I made a composite of all those drawings, and then made this sculpture. A lot of times, it's a sculpture may come together completely from one drawing. It doesn't have to be an amalgam. But I find that drawing is a really humble and earnest way to kind of communicate with your imagery and try to test out and find out what works for you and what you seem to be repeating. This is an example. If you see in the kind of top, a little bit off to the right, there's a little sketch that was just a little doodle that became this sculpture. So you never quite sure. I think the beauty of drawing is that you're never quite sure when you're going to draw something that's compelling to you, or when you're just going to be doing something that you might throw away. These are also, this drawing is of this sculpture, but it was made from this drawing, this kind of David Hockney drawing of this raft, with this drawing of a cat's butthole coming from around a corner, and ended up making this sculpture. It's in this way, I think, a lot of times when I'm drawing, I'm not necessarily thinking of concepts or explaining the works. As you'll see later when I do some interpretations, these were also a couple of drawings that ended up making themselves into this piece. Normally when I'm drawing, I'm not illustrating any sort of concept or even worrying about possibility of interpretations or even my own intentions. I'm just drawing purely from, as I explained, this kind of desire to just make imagery and to participate in maybe with my unconscious and the kinds of images that are sticking with me, or even lately as I've worked my way into more abstraction, into the kind of archetypal forms that happen. This was also a series of drawings that I edited together that ended up making this sculpture. Anyway, lately I found what's most compelling is this kind of drawing that people might call doodling. I find that a lot of times as I've been working, especially early on, it was my desire to go into the outer reaches of contemplation, to get to places that were far out, that were strange and outside of me. And as I've continued to progress, I feel like I'm more interested in a doodly, muscly kind of drawing, which illuminates imagery that I think is already inside of me. And this would be a kind of example of that. Things that don't necessarily directly relate themselves to content, but have a more abstract, emotional, or psychological feel. Yet, this was an old drawing, but I think this drawing and this drawing, even though they were done 10 years apart, and one is kind of representational, they have a kind of similar formal vibe. So to me, what I've realized in the last maybe 5 years is that what is most important to me is working. And I think that to me, there's a lot of different concepts about working, but the one that I think is most applies to what I do is called work as prayer. And I think it's something that the Shakers did, and I think it's something that a lot of artists do, even poets do, the people that take their craft really seriously, that spend time working. And some of the people that I met with today, I mentioned this thing about Adderall and people with ADHD, and sometimes when people have difficulty focusing, I think for a lot of artists, time spent in the studio is a kind of meditation and a kind of a sacred space to focus and to put your energies into one place. So this is where I work. This is the wood shop that I work in. A lot of times I'm sitting on this stool, just carving away, marking time, going through the day almost in a meditative state, letting ideas come and go, good or bad, and trying not to judge those, or just listening to music. It's actually pretty banal, but I find it very comforting. And these are some of the tools that I use. A lot of grinders. I subtract a lot from material. So, and I find that the sound, even the sound of the machines, sometimes can be really soothing, and they're kind of in the way that maybe a meditation bowl would be. And I've even found that these are some of the clothes that I wear when I work, and I even find that sometimes the clothes, even though they don't appear to be mystical, like maybe the way that a priest wears his robes or a Hasid wears, the things that they wear, but I feel personally that it is kind of mystical, and that it does put up this kind of barrier in this area in which I get into, and that I'm able to do the things that I do. This is the other room that I work in, that tiny little room there. It has a big fan, and so I don't have to worry about dust everywhere and stuff. And these are my sanding tools. These are equivalent to paintbrushes or whatever, scissors. And then this is my clean room where I can dye. I do a lot of dyeing of wood now, and or painting. And this is a place where I can look at things and try to understand what I've done or see how they look. This is my desk. I also do a lot of repetitive nature. The quality of a lot of the things I do is very repetitive, and so I've also found it really interesting to try to fabricate some of my own tools that take on the actual patina of the time passing. Of like, I make a lot of beads, I do jewelry and other things that make their way into sculpture, and I've found that I actually enjoy the making of the tools that help me to create some of the things that I do. And I do a lot of sewing. All right, so these are the patterns that I've laid out for the kind of imagery of the work. And the way that this is going to work is that I'll kind of describe why these patterns are important or what I think is interesting about them. But the imagery comes from, about a 15-year period. So you'll be seeing a lot of different works. And the goal is to kind of synthesize the two works and to kind of show the difference in representation and abstraction, and kind of just to geek out on the formal and the imagery. So sometimes there'll be times when I won't be talking at all, which will probably be refreshing. Okay, the body. I find obviously the body is important to almost everyone's work. It's who we are, it's how we experience the world. The body obviously has an interior and an exterior, and it has consciousness, and it says so much and sets up so much with narrative, and implies so many things. And I think from the very beginning of time, people have tried to represent the body and its insides and tried to understand that. I also actually use my body in sculpture, for example, with costuming, and actually getting inside things and existing. And then obviously I'm using the body as an effigy, as a stand-in for something real, a person. Sometimes in its pure abstraction, and sometimes in its kind of fantastical forms. And often I think I've found that it's most striking when it's disembodied from its source or completely abstracted. And I guess that's not limited to people. So this is a little snippet of performance where I'm actually using the body. And then sometimes, like in a piece like this, I feel like I'm actually using, this is kind of a meditation pod. I feel like actually the absence of the body becomes this weird stand-in. One of my favorite things about the body is the orifice. I think the orifice is most exciting because it's the contact part between us and the outer world. It's probably where we're most vulnerable, where we catch disease, where we, but it's also where we feed ourselves, or where we exit, let things exit from us. And I found through the years that whether I use it in a crass way or in a more grounded and spiritual context, I found that the orifice, the anus, the vagina, the eyeball, the wound is something that's been really important to my work. So this is an ass rape. And then this is also, to me, can be read as anus or portal. Vagina. This is vaginal, but I also read it as a seed, like a seed pod. And this was the cat's butthole. You can't see it very well. I think the wound also really, I think, has been exciting for me as well. And I think also through history, it's been exciting, like with Doubting Thomas and people like that. The wound is always this place that people want to investigate. And then a kind of figurative womb. The portal is a similar idea, I think, to the orifice, except it's a more metaphysical and mystical idea, as if this hole leads you to another area. And although it's the same content, I think it applies in a totally different way. Instead of something that you use for eating, it's actual for your physical or mental consciousness to pass through. A kind of focus point. And this is, to me, this is like a very figurative portal. This is like another meditation pod where the idea of it is that it's a portal, almost like a Star Trek or something. The same with this. And then a lot of times, you know, I've made entire worlds that I feel like are entered through portals, like this one. And its converse, the vessel, I think, has always been really exciting to me, in that you create this emptiness. Excuse me. And I think the tomb is a very exciting vessel. Like the cocoon is a super exciting vessel. I like to think of the vessel as like a womb, has a womb-like quality, a shelter-like quality, a place to hide. Probably my all-time favorite, and I'm probably sure most men's favorite, is the penis/vertical. I think over the history of all object making and image making, it's probably the most prevalent. I think that it helps us stay virile. It helps us. The idea is that as long as it's erect, we're somehow fighting death. And to me, it's an amazing shape, and it's always resonated through all my work, whether it's a horn or a penis or architectural. There's always something about it that resonates. I also consider it later, another section is when the vertical becomes a wand, or, you know, like something magical, as if it contains this vector of magic. in this, for example. I love the idea of the magic wand. I like the idea, or I'm interested at least in it, that somehow this penis becomes this thing that wills things to happen. I also kind of like that way of believing in some sort of physical manifestation of desire. And so I work a lot with the magic wand. I think it's a really fascinating tool. And I think I like the trickery of it. And so from everything from literal magic wands to figurative vine magic wands to staffs, brooms, pool cues, spears. And this pink thing that goes through this dwelling is actually a big wand. I'll show some videos of it later. The eyeball, super exciting. I think since ancient times, it's an archetypal thing, self-discovery. A kind of mystical quality, unblinking. Body fluids, I think, very exciting. I was talking with a student earlier about body fluids. I think body fluids as sculpture, I think, are super exciting. I'm sure, like, in Baroque sculptures, they would have loved to have been able to have this skill to do body fluids. I think they're always really exciting, whether it's urine or cum or mucus, shit. I think they're all kind of taboos in a weird way, but they're so, I love the natural quality. And I think as my work changed, I continued to use body fluids, but in a more abstract quality like this. Vomit, that's a good one too. The mask, super exciting. I think as like Joseph Campbell explains, like the first game that you play with a baby is this idea of hide and go seek. I think super influential to me, especially as it relates to dressing up in drag. Or BDSM club or something. And costuming has been a major, for the last couple of years, obsession of mine. The landscape, whether it's a whole lot of little things together or, you know, the illusion of something greater. An installation, I think it's like the idea of the landscape as it plays out with foreground, middle ground, background is a great tool for presentation of narrative and for any sort of kind of framework for ideas, even if that landscape includes something like the phases of the moon, like here, or some sort of, you know, figurative mountainscape. counting, I think, I've talked to some students today, counting, I think, is perfect for people who need a meditative quality to their work. I think the repetition of imagery, as I described to some students today, as for me as being something for years that I worked horizontally in my acquiring of imagery, trying to dominate all sorts of different types of imagery. And then over the last 5 years, I've worked in a more vertical and deep way with repetition of imagery, which I think includes counting. I love the repetition of things, the counting as it relates to the marking of time, and kind of keeps you in the moment of making and in a kind of now moment. So I've really taken myself to beating and any sort of like repetitive quality of making. I think like this is one that I do a lot now, where I'm taking away from the wood and different parts. I find like super soothing counting. Okay, so now I'm always so happy when I finish that part, because I feel when I'm lecturing I should be talking all the time. But anyway, the interpretations of these works, I think, are I'm going to go through a couple of bodies of work just to give you a sample of how I think about these works. I don't necessarily suggest that anyone else needs to think about them this way, but I think when you're making works, sometimes you owe it to yourself or other people to try to explain them. But as time goes on, I guess I feel more and more maybe it's not such a necessity. But one of the major themes that I'm interested in is this idea of energy transference. And not only energy transference, but the transmutation of from one state to another. And I think like maybe that's because I work in sculpture and that I'm always taking away from an object and transforming it from nothing into something, or maybe this is just the nature of being. But for this project, for example, I think of this project as two different states of being. One, I think this is a Jungian idea, but let's say that your life is divided into two halves. The first half of your life would be your the kind of structured, sheltered part of your life. You're trying to kind of escape the womb and become a person. And the second half of your life would be divided into a part of trying to stay virile and trying to stay vertical and trying to stay alive and erect. So one is horizontal, one is vertical. So in this kind of tableau, what I imagine in this tableau is that as you can kind of, I think I'm going to show a video, but I'm laying down in this kind of structure, which I called a womb. Underneath it are these black tits, and they're black because they're milkless, they're finished. And I'm tied, I'm in this costume, and the costume just has one arm. One arm is inside the costume, the other one is in this wooden gauntlet. Have this mask on, and the gauntlet is tied to this long pole. And the pole, you see these are the milkless titties. And this is the fulcrum at which the pole goes over. And then on the other side is this kind of altar of these phalluses. And so from one state, I'm kind of preparing and keeping the other side erect for my eventual taking responsibility side of my life, or a life. And above it is this kind of cycle of the moon. This is like a 40-foot batik above there with these leather lights that have the cycle of the moon cut into them. That's the batik. And this is the clitoris of the vagina shelter. And this is a little video. I'm not going to play the whole thing because it's like 2 minutes, but. I'll skip ahead a little bit. This is another kind of transmutation piece. I'm actually inside this thing. And inside there, that kind of penis-y horn thing keeps me attached to the wall. And you can see I have all these little tubes at the bottom there. And inside, I'm holding this staff, and I'm able, through some trickery, to shake these beads. And so these beads give this kind of luring quality, and kind of to lure the viewer. But I also think of it as luring, like in a meditative quality, like as if you're right before you take a breath, like you're luring good energy or something like that. And so I shake the beads, and then I expel this liquid through the tips of these toes. This is a little video of that. Sex and its kind of gray area with violence and entropy or something that I was interested in for a really long time. I think it was kind of a side effect of September 11th. I think after seeing that, I think also in internet, the history of the internet, right around that time, you're starting to be exposed, if you so chose, to find it, to any sort of fetish that was possibly out there, which was, to me at least, was really new. I mean, I guess in the early 90s there were news groups and places that you could go to find crazy explicit imagery, but I feel like maybe after September 11th, after being faced with what happens to a body when it's under extreme duress, I think everyone's collective mind just went like, or at least I know mine did. And after, in the years following that, I think for the first time in my life was a time that I find myself wanting to be political, but also kind of trying to understand the United States' place in history and what it was doing. And so I found a real parallel with Roman Empire. And I was thinking, like, if anyone's ever seen the movie Caligula or knows anything about that time period, at the height of the Roman Empire is completely opulent and hedonistic. People, like, just tons of insane grafting of sex and violence and entertainment. And I kind of felt like that we were definitely at the end of our empire, and that instead of having it be a public forum or for, the president, that on the internet you could see all sorts of insane, violent entertainment, whether it was videos of Joe Theismann's leg breaking or a prolapsed rectum or, whatever, anything that you ever wanted to see was out there. And so I wanted to create this show that was kind of decadently sexual and violent, and so that it was unclear whether it was consensual pleasure or consensual pain. But this is the show that I created. And it was about, for example, and the way that I read the narratives was, it was like we were so fat from eating so much hamburgers that our bellies were so big that we couldn't see that someone had been eating our penises. Or that it just wasn't worth it, and that we should do some sort of, mass suicide that doubled as autoerotic asphyxiation. That somehow, being fisted with this barbed wire, thorny log was pleasurable, and there was nothing wrong with that, except maybe there was, I don't know. That we were pissing and coming and everything all at once, that there was no real reason to have children. And I always thought of this as kind of the, like the Dennis Cooper-y kind of piece, like where it's like, there's like all these things that are on this pipe. It used to be that people, I guess maybe they still have them in restaurants, it's like a pole, and when you're done with the receipt, you smash the receipt over the pole. So this is the skin from around the anus that's been put over this pole, and then someone's like getting off to it. And then this is like worst case scenario, like you're like shitting blood and you're at the very end of the toilet paper roll. I also found like environmental entropy and kind of worst case scenario with the environment in a piece like this, where as the tableaus started to get bigger, like a kind of bloody tsunami with all this garbage in it. I'll show some details, but in the left-hand corner of that piece, there's some killer bees, and then there's just this big fat belly, and then all these like used up batteries that are mixed with LSD. A kind of apocalyptic, like I was saying, violent entropy kind of vibe, where people are having sex with concrete. This is the LSD and the batteries. And the killer bees, man-made. And then I thought I would just share with you like a type of interpretation that I don't really do anymore, but that I called forensic narrative. And I call it that because if you ever watch like a Sherlock Holmes, like when Sherlock Holmes comes on the scene, he does all this like triangulation. So he'll see like one object and then another object, and then he'll somehow triangulate those two with something that's not there to create this narrative. Like he never comes on the scene and says like, oh, I got you with this DNA test or something, you know? It's like there's always something missing. And so for years, the way that I worked, I showed you how I made these drawings, and the drawings, as I was trying to explain, like they don't really come from me trying to will some sort of idea or illustrate a concept, but because I spend so much time fabricating, I have like a really impractical amount of time to apply to interpretation, or at least I used to. Now I don't think about it as much. So I made shows that had very elaborate descriptions, like for example, this one. And this one, what I tried to imagine with this show, or what I kind of interpreted these pieces as, was that if there was a possibility for an uprising in the United States, what would that look like? And so this is really far-fetched, but what I decided was that the only way there could be an uprising is if they mapped the genome, and by mapping the genome, they could figure out who was going to be sick and who wasn't going to be sick, and kind of a eugenics thing, and who was going to, and in that sense, they could decide to not insure people, and that those people that would be uninsured wouldn't have any access to health care, and they would revert back to these kind of mysterious ways of healing yourself, like through, I don't know, weird things like wives' tales, like rub an apple on your wart or that kind of thing, and that all of the marginalized peoples would band together, and that they'd be like a ragtag, like kind of terrorist group. And so the way that I arrived at that was through interpreting works like this. So here you have like a baseball mound with this weird pink shape on it. You have a basket of turds, a mouth with a magic wand in it, and this weird vortex. And so I thought, well, if they've mapped the genome and they know who's going to be healthy and who's going to be sick, then maybe they can predict things like elections or World Series. And so I said, yeah, of course, the World Series. Then everything would be predicted. They'd know, because who was stronger, who had the better DNA, who would win an election or the World Series. So I thought, well, how could they throw it off? Well, they could throw it off if the players from the weak team, they put all of their poop into the dirt of the baseball mound, and that somehow that would give them this weird edge, and that they could use voodoo and magic to win. And then I thought, maybe people who are mentally handicapped or physically handicapped, like, and that when we institutionalize them, like maybe our institutionalization of them is keeping them from realizing their real potential, as if they could that people who are physically or mentally compromised were actually supposed to somehow divine the fountain of youth. That's what I got from this. Then I thought, you know, they talk a lot about consciousness, and that consciousness doesn't always just exist in the mind, that they think that maybe some of the nerves of your body actually have consciousness, so that when you're touching something hot, it's not your brain that sends a signal to your hand to move, but actually the nerves in your hand that move first. So then I thought, well, maybe all the body parts that get ripped off during this big uprising, like maybe they'll save themselves. And so that's what this is. And then I thought that zombies, that they would definitely figure out how to bring people back from the dead, and that those people they brought back from the dead wouldn't need oxygen. And so they would start destroying all the plant life, so that the people from this master race like wouldn't have any oxygen to breathe. And then I thought maybe the frontline soldiers could be people with leprosy, so that when people tried to catch them, their hands would fall off or their arms would fall off. And so I also simultaneously, I think, got interested in the idea of an uprising because it puts together all these disparate things that you'd never see. Like if there was a riot, you might get like a Fendi purse with like a hot dog and a motorcycle wheel or something, you know what I mean? And it's like, you'd have to decide whether that made a narrative or not. And then I thought, if anybody knows the story of the rapture, it's supposed to be all the people that are blessed and believers, they disappear from the face of the earth and go into heaven. Well, I thought, what if somehow we could have a reverse rapture? And I thought that the perfect reverse rapture would be that all the bad people were sucked into this cat's butthole. And so that's what this cat's butthole is. And then I thought about this evil vapor. Also, I won't even go into that one. So recently I've been thinking a lot more about psychology and mythology, and I think like in terms of narrative for these kinds of works, like this is a show that I made that I imagined was all about the investigation of this shadow side of the self, which I think, in my understanding from Jungian psychology, is that the point of consciousness is actually to go into your hang-ups and kind of illuminate them. And I think that it accounts for a lot of the darker narratives in the history of art making and cultural artifacts, as this kind of investigation of that dark side. And so for me, like, I feel like my hang-up was this kind of insecurity and inadequacy. And at the time I was looking at a lot of, I don't know if anyone's ever seen Birds of Paradise, but there are these birds that look normal, and then all of a sudden they go out and they're all big and puffy. And this happens a lot in nature. And I thought a lot about costuming and dark costuming, and how dark costuming, even to judge's robes, there's this way of making yourself look bigger and kind of overcompensating for your insecurity. And so this was like one of the shows that I made that kind of investigated that kind of weird, mystical, the kind of dark, insecure side of mysticism. And so I made these 4 cloaks. So they hang on the wall, but they're actually meant to be worn. Like this is that cloak. And I kind of like got into the idea of self-discovery through illuminating your hang-ups. And so I made all these like deep, dark costumes to do these kind of like, make these movies, these little videos of a kind of mystical transformation and illumination of like hang-ups and dark sides and kind of secret society kind of feeling. And this is a double cloak that I made for me and my wife. That's us in the cloak. And then the 4 sculptures that went along with it were kind of, I imagined, as like votives, like they were like kind of hopeful transmissions for self-discovery or something. And then this is, I got really into Joseph Campbell as well, and his idea of the hero's narrative, and kind of made this abysmal kind of forest, underwater / forest thing. And in his estimation, and a lot of mythology, the narrative is like a person goes into the unknown and discovers themselves and comes back, and so and shares what they've learned with people. And that could be anything from slaying a dragon to, in medieval times, a lot of times they were looking for the Holy Grail. It includes alchemy and all sorts of other narratives. And so in this scenario, I kind of made this forest that had this being in the center, which I inhabited like during an opening and just kind of stood there. It had all these like little helpers, these elven people. And it had a masculine and feminine side. This tube here is like a kind of fallopian tube. Another theme and narrative and interpretation that I was really interested in and has been really influential to me, to my work, is this idea of otherness. And I think that for white, straight men, my own content didn't really seem that interesting to me, and that I really adored all sorts of otherness, and that included everything from black culture to gay culture to anything that wasn't me. I found super interesting. And this project I made in about 2004 about funk music, and I got really into the idea about that, especially funk music from the 70s was protest music, but also party music, and that I was super disappointed that during the war that there were hardly any protest songs or even that much protest art. And so in my mind, a funk concert was like a perfect model for this kind of participation that was not only engaging but also informative and political. And so I mapped out 3 bands: Curtis Mayfield, who I saw as the domestic warrior in his politics. This band from Brooklyn called Mandrill, which I envisioned as the kind of Henri Rousseau of the funk scene, meaning that like they were very multi-culty, and that there was a beauty in that, but also this crazy danger to people who were closed-minded or predators. And then Earth, Wind, and Fire, whose message was like love and good times. And then there were these were supposed to be the audience members, which embodied all sorts of ideas about politics and military and stuff like that. I don't want to go into all that. Also, I was really pissed off that no one created an exit strategy for Iraq. And so I thought that if it were possible to turn people gay, that it might be great to turn all of our soldiers gay so that they could focus more on the body, and that realize that the body and that love and that psychology was much more important than materials. So I had these soldiers that were kind of dressed up Vietnam style, but were they sweating or had they just been facialized? And then there were guys that were, I got really into anal leakage and modern primitive and stuff like that. I just thought a lot about the body and how the body was so much more interesting than the policy. And then recently, I've been working a lot with this kind of cyclical narratives and interpretations that I think have a lot to do with birthing and seasonal, like a kind of cyclical kind of narrative. And so this is a project I most recently finished. And to me, I've gotten really interested in this mythology that happens from Egyptian to Grecian to Romans, which is this idea of what happens on the other side after you die. And so for the Egyptians, a lot of times there was some sort of boat that carried the body and to which it was judged, or something happened and it went to the other side to restart again. With the Grecians, they had this crazy like Cyclops guy named Charon that stood over and made this judgment over river Styx. And you have like in the Divine Comedy, they have it. So I imagine this is kind of this blue part is the threshold from one world to the other. These are the different aspects of the people on that boat, like a kind of guardian eagle, this digestive gate. These things that are kind of like butt plugs. I think of them as expanding consciousness. Like it's like you can dilate like this. The deeper you stick it in, the more you dilate. And then I actually performed inside this huge penis. I get inside of it and I play the flute. And this is in my studio. I didn't make a video in the exhibition, but I get inside there. I play these kind of melodies on the flute. I shake this big staff, and then this kind of judgment comes out of this spout. And then at the end of it is this kind of body. You know, it's very abstracted. It's kind of micro and macro. It's the cells. It's the universe. It's the actual organs of the body. And then this in the front. At first, I thought of it as penises, and then part waterfalls, and then breaths, and then like the more I used this shape, the more it unfolded. This is also a kind of funerary. To me, I see it as a funerary kind of setup. On one side, I had this like masculine pod that presented this judgment, and then same with the other one. So this is the masculine side. I had this like weird snorkel that I'll show you a little video. It'll explain it easier. So these are these little balls of clay that we're kneading. So the thing that was crazy about this is that while I was working on this piece, when I started to title it, I started to do a little bit of research and was like looking for a title, and I realized that I had kind of recreated this weird Navajo creation myth. And the Navajo creation myth was that there was this, that all that was on the earth was this turtle. And this woman fell out of the sky onto the turtle, and she heard a voice from the sky tell her to dive down through the water and bring up these little pieces of mud. And those pieces of mud ended up becoming the earth. It really freaked me out because I was thinking of this as like birthing or shitting or something like that, but then there were all these like weird coincidences. And I think according to Joseph Campbell or Jung or someone like that, that it's not necessarily a coincidence, that it's almost like an inherited memory, that we have these ways of presenting imagery that becomes an embodiment of our mythology and our curiosity about the mystery of the earth. And then these were these kind of, I imagine them as like I was saying, like these expansion, they're butt plugs, but the butt plug is actually a metaphor for the kind of expansion of your orifice that lets the world come into you, or vice versa. This is the female pod. So personally, like the side effect to doing all these performances has been like to be able to use breathing techniques and other ways of coping mechanisms that are purely psychological, or to actually be able to do these performances, because they last a really long time. And so they end up being super humbling, because I imagine that this work frees me up in a way spiritually, but it always ends up being much more humbling than you would think, because it's like sometimes people heckle you when you're performing, or it just feels hokey or whatever, and you have all this time to yourself to kind of consider these things.
How long do your performances last?
Like sometimes like 3-4 hours.
You do them once per show? Or
yeah, I call them activations. I feel like it's kind of like a christening. Like it's like I feel like I really was searching really hard to find a way to make the sculptures feel more honest, and that's how I arrived at putting the body in them. It kind of gave them this like warm quality, and so I do the activations. One time I did it during a week of a run of the show in Berlin, but it was a total disaster. This is also kind of a seasonal funerary kind of a project that's centered around dying and recreating. This one had a super autumnal vibe, I thought. And then recently also I've been working with this kind of idea of silence and tranquility, and that to me means that I'm making works that don't necessarily have explanations, but they give off this kind of vibe of tranquility or calmness or breathing. And so for a project like this, like I thought of the background painting as relating to like breathing techniques, and like maybe like a kind of Grecian idea of this spirit like releasing, the soul and the body like releasing from each other. And then ideas about kind of like either these are like tears, or they're like snot coming from a nose, or they're purely just a landscape. But recently I've been a little bit more comfortable to describe it in terms of tranquility and silence than to give like pure narrative forms to the work. Like still idea of the seasons or harvesting or something happening though. And then lastly, I'm almost finished, but I always like to try to conclude with this for lectures at schools about this idea of change. I know a lot of people experiment when they're in school, and I think for me personally, I think change is like probably one of the most important qualities of being an artist, and to be able to fully embrace change and to stay supple and green and bendable. I think it's really important, and I think it's important because people don't. I think it's difficult, especially if you have any success, because people kind of enjoy for you to be the person that they want you to be. But people change, and for me, I've been. I used to give this lecture in terms of change. I used to talk about the beginning work that I made and my change into the work that I make now. But I felt like it was a little bit dishonest, because it all comes from the same place, and it all kind of illuminates the same issues if you want it to. But for me, personally, I think that change is a really amazing quality to have in your work. It exposes you to new and exciting things that you thought you'd maybe never like, or never want to make, or never want to be a part of. But for me, like, these are works that this is a work that I made in 2000, basically. This is works that I made in 2005, works that I made in 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, and basically the work that I make now. So that's it. I conclude like that. Questions? To me, I mean, a lot of times, like, I get the mood out if I want to go in those terms. During the process, especially lately in making, I allow for a lot more improvisation and a lot of change, and I've really tried to loosen up. And I think my goal always within a work is to have a little bit of all the different vibes, like all the different possible vibes, from tight and OCD to loose and I don't care, you know, like I try to have all those different things. But lately, like, I realized, like, when I was in school, like, I feel like I got like a disease from school, and that disease was that I had to explain everything, and and especially when I came to New York and I had studio visits and I wanted to look intelligent for people that were coming, like, I spent a lot of time in interpretation. And I feel like now, what I've had to learn is I learned to find out what was really pleasurable to me personally, what made me feel good about working and what I wanted to spend my time on. And I found that even though it made me feel awkward because I didn't have as much to say to people, that I was actually more illuminated if I relaxed and let the illumination of the works come to me slowly. And also to allow for myself to change my mind, you know, and that, like, I find, like, you know, in a couple of years, like, I'll be able to reinvestigate the works I'm making from this period and change my mind. I think it's really important to be able to do that. With the earlier works where I really dug in and committed to those narratives, like, I find the visual part of it still really exciting, but I don't like so much the interpretations. And so I'm curious to see, like, in 10 years when I start to forget those, like, if I'll decide to go back into those and give the lecture or my interpretation in a totally different way. I find it, the interpretation I always find really frustrating, because while I was working in the very, what I was calling forensic narrative style, like, no one ever interpreted them that way. It was like really impractical to go that deep into the works, and nobody ever did it. Everyone just thought it was surrealism, and it drove me fucking insane. So I just, you know what I mean? I changed it up for myself and for my audience. I mean, I think, like, when I was in high school, like, I was very attracted to, like, Joseph Cornell and like Anselm Kiefer and people like that, and I didn't really think I didn't really think at all about the interpretation of the works, or like how they, like, I just loved making stuff. I didn't really understand that it was meditative, but I think it always has been. While I was in school, I think the difference is that, like, when I was in school, I don't know what it's like for you guys or your particular program, but at Yale, from '98 to 2000 was like the last vestiges of people who were really, like, art jocks. That's what I used to call them. Like, they're like really always wanted to argue about theory, and we're reading Hal Foster, and we're just like, this is blah blah blah. And so, like, people called me a wizard, and like people like, you know, would make fun of me and stuff like that. And so it didn't feel so meditative to me, because I felt like I had to defend my position as a maker and a poetic person to people, you know, who weren't interested in the best, what I consider the best part of the mind is the part that's not logical. I mean, it's like, what else is there for us, you know? Like, people can write essays and give lectures and stuff, but I see the only, for me, the value in that is if you make really political art, and then I'm all for it. But if you just want to, like, bullshit about theory, it's just not for me. So I don't think it was as meditative for me. And I was talking with another student today, and I said that it took me years and years and years to just admit to myself that I really enjoy the process of working, and that work is prayer for me, and that is what mellows me out, and it is what keeps me balanced. And it's like, I was shocked to find that other people felt that way, or maybe were even interested in talking about that. And so I still feel embarrassed to talk about my work in these terms, but I feel like it's what's most honest, so I share it. Normally, like, normally it happens all at once. Like with the cocoons with the painted hands, like when I made the drawing of the cocoon, I just knew that we were gonna have to need clay and drop clay turds out. Like, my mind works that way. I don't know why. And so with other works, like the one where I'm tied up into the thing, like, I didn't really know that it was going to be a performance piece at first, because I kind of drew the part that I'm inside. Originally, the drawing looked kind of more like a dock, and it kind of had this, like, weird feeling that something was coming out from it. And so as I started drawing it, I drew some things, and then it kind of came into fruition that way. But I think most of them start out as when I'm drawing the shape, it has the body-like form, and sometimes I'll draw something that I think should be a performance, and then I'm like, I'm not doing that. And so I just, like, do something else, but yeah. No, but I love ceramics. I wish that I was a ceramicist. I think that, to me, like, I feel like the ceramic model of the world can be really interesting. I think it's such an ancient kind of vibe. Like, I really am envious of it, but I don't have anywhere to practice it. But I don't have a background in ceramics.
Is there any particular culture that you look into, enjoy looking at it, or?
You know, my thing with culture is that it's like, you always think that you're not interested in, you know, whatever. Like, oh, I don't like the look of that shit. But then I always find out I really am interested into it. But I mean, I think for different periods, different things. Like right now, like I like in the last maybe year and a half, like I realized I have a whole Japanese thing that I didn't really even realize. It started with ikebana. Like, I realized, oh my God, I love ikebana. Like, it's so awesome, and went crazy on ikebana. But like, I think, like, in terms of like where I feel, for whatever reason, like where my home note is with culture is like some sort of weird Oceania. Like, I really love Oceania, and I can't explain why or how it becomes into me. But my experience with culture is, my wife is Turkish, and I think what really, one of the things that changed my work the most was we go to Turkey twice a year. And there's something so amazing about the quality of how they make things. And so it's simultaneously European, but so handmade and weird. Like they'll make like a beautiful pavilion on the waterfront that's bathrooms. And whereas in Switzerland, maybe you'd have a nice blue sign that said WC. They just have a guy come with a big paintbrush and be like, you know, and it's like, it looks like a Cy Twombly, you know, it's like amazing. And so I think that it really taught me a lot. Like my actual, I think the other thing that really inspired the early look of my work was I made architectural models for an architect. And so everything I did was measuring. And so I had I'm a very disciplined person, so I got used to measuring and being very tight. And I think that's why I did a lot of representational work early. But as I age, I find that like if I trust my hand and I don't use any measuring tools, and like if I have to make a vertical, like I just carve it out of a block instead of buying a dowel, you know, because you can't make, you know, it's like stuff doesn't look like that unless it's natural. And the natural stuff, like how could you make a tree? You know, like when I see a tree, like I'm always like, I mean, I know Roxy Payne makes them, but I'm just saying, like when you look at a tree, it's like the most amazing sculpture. And so I get inspired by that too. And I think a lot of Oceania and a lot of cultural artifacts are kind of more natural. They have like a, you know, and the necessity for them to be made is more natural too. Like they're not just for shits and giggles and for market, you know, they're for like real magical and traditional uses. And so I personally don't belong to any organized thing, but I make as if I want to create my own traditions and my own, you know, my own world of like self-discovery, whatever that means, whether it's costuming or installations or paintings, you know. I think people like really liked it. I mean, that's a stupid thing to say, but I found that people, like when you go into a forest, there's so many different things and patterns and things to look at, and it's not really overwhelming, I think. I think people find it calming, and I think that people found the space really tranquil. I showed it in a couple of different venues, and most of the time when I showed it, people would say that some people would just go and just sit down inside of it, and there were so many things to look at. And since it was all made out of fabric, it also had this deadening quality to the sound where you just felt like almost like in a silent room. And I think people enjoyed it. I think in the end with that piece though, because it was so fanciful that some people saw it in the light of like a Tim Burton or something, which kind of pissed me off. But what can you do? My thing with performance that I always notice is that it's like I set out and design it for this one experience, you know, like I really imagine that it's going to take me to this next level, like that it's going to. But the funny thing about life, I think, is that it's like you expect this one experience, but you never get that. You get this other thing, and the cool thing is it's not useless. Like it's like for some of them, like they really are humbling because it's painful. And you just want it to end, and you keep saying, like, well, why did I do this to myself? Like, why didn't I design this to be more ergonomic? Or like, why is this thing like fucking poking in my back? And why is there some guy that smells like a big cigarette, like won't leave me alone? You know what I mean? Like, it's like you get challenged, but all those adversities like teach you this thing. And so I think like I'm in a place of no person in a way to deal with it, because it's a endurance. You know, and so I would imagine that it's the same mind frame as someone who runs a marathon, or like, I mean, even though that's 1,000 times more amazing, I'm just saying it's like you get into this mind frame where you just focus on the task at hand, so that you don't have to think about like how many hours do I have left, or you know, one of those things. And so I think like I kind of like I just did the last performance I just did was in the big blue penis with the pink wand and the flute, and being able to play the flute was like really awesome, because it gave me something to do that I really enjoy, that calms me down, that makes me feel like tranquil. And so that was the first time that I actually did a performance that wasn't just associated totally with pain. But if anybody ever has meditated or does anything like that, like a lot of times like your leg will fall asleep, or your back will hurt or something like that, and it can be irritating, but it's really just another opportunity and an exercise to focus on that pain and either make it like greater or lessen it, and to figure out that you can control a lot more than you thought with your mind. So I don't see it as like a self-portraiture or anything like that. I see it more as like another test in mind control or pain management. I don't work with assistants. I really, I mean, I'm not saying I will never work with assistants, but I feel like I feel satisfied with the amount that I do. I wouldn't want to be making a show every month or be doing like, you know, if I would, I mean, I've done some pretty large scale projects, but I really have found that the work that it takes to make those projects is worth it. And that like, I don't, I'm afraid to have somebody in the studio, like, I don't want to find something for somebody to do, and I feel like when it's time for me to stop working, like I need to stop working, and I need to like fuck off on the internet for an hour or whatever, like, or read a book or do whatever. And so it's like, I guess just out of fear, I haven't brought somebody in to help me. I feel like the only reason right now that I would want an assistant was so I didn't waste too much time on the internet. And I don't know if that's a good idea, you know, for an assistant. Like, but I'm not against using people. I really like to do the work myself, and I find the private nature of it to be comforting. And I don't really want somebody like poking around. I already have studio mates, so it's like, that's enough for me. Well, I started doing that actually because I had the show in Spain. I showed it, there was a big dome in the background and all these little pieces in front of it. Excuse me. And the space was black. And when we had to photograph the works, like I wanted to have them photographed individually for a book I was working on. And the only way we could really do it was to photograph them on black. And I just really liked it. Like I felt like it brought out like this weird nighttime quality to the works. And like, and so then I started doing it in the studio. I don't do it anymore right now. This is kind of phase. I went through a whole phase actually where I made work under incandescent light. Like now I have fluorescent in my studio, but like for a whole year and a half or so, like all the works that I made either had their own lighting system, which was dim, but I created all those works in that dim light because I made them fast. Like the whole forest project took me a year to make, and I made it all in the studio. And as I made it, I added lights, and I just like started to make stuff in the dark basically. And like I feel like it helped me because I like to spend so much time working on stuff and to get all immaculate and stuff. It helped me to like just like go faster and not worry about stuff. And I think it all led up to the moments of me starting to photograph stuff on black. A lot of like cultural artifacts are also photographed on black. And I don't know why. Maybe the light is bad for them, or I don't know. I think it was more, it always did. I just didn't understand what meditative quality was. You know what I mean? Like I always was, like all the work I've ever done has been super labor intensive. And some of it's terrible work, like when all the early stuff is MDF and it's a really nasty like material. It just like makes you itchy and just awful. But regular wood isn't so bad. It has a pretty nice smell, and it's like, and so I think as I started to be interested in meditation, I found that the work became more meditative. But I think also the difference is that the earlier works were fabrications directly of the drawings, and as the newer works, the drawings inspire the piece, but it's not always a one-to-one ratio, so there's a lot more room for me to focus on other things than like trying to represent the drawing. I can't really illuminate that. I mean, it's like, I think with the wood, sometimes the polished quality isn't so polished, it looks like it in a photograph, but like, it's just a geeking thing. Like I think when you're drawing, you can draw something and fully understand it in 5 seconds. Whereas like in a sculpture, like you're standing in front of something real. It's not like an illusion. So it's like, I tend to want to make it perfect because you can see whether it's perfect or not. And a drawing, it's always perfect because it is what it is. Well, I think the way that I imagined it was that like, how could I get to a place that like my goal, like when I was talking about that, like I use that as an example of like, I wanted my mind to expand. And I feel like school made me feel like whatever I did had to be understood. And so if I had to understand it, how could I create a situation where I could go beyond my understanding? And so I feel like I had to calm down and accept the fact that I might not be able to understand this thing, and that it might be better for me to actually not pressure myself to understand it. And I think for me, like when I was in school, I was amongst, I always said that they chose the students. There were 19 students at Yale Sculpture, and they were chosen like you would choose contestants for the real world. Like you had like a redneck and a black guy, you know, and it's like they hated each other. And they kind of made each other better, because in the end they were forced to understand each other, which was great, but it was hell during that process of understanding. And so they chose, like they always chose one year like a maker. And then they chose somebody who was like kind of not really an artist, like a graphic designer or an architect. And then they chose like a conceptual person and a performance person. And like when they all got together, even though they were all artists, like the director kind of pushed those people to argue with each other and defend themselves. And I found for myself that like the part of the mind that was most interesting was not the part that had to be understood and to be rational, that I liked the more mysterious and lava-like quality of the mind, and how there are certain things that just aren't understandable, like synchronicity or psychic stuff. Like they kind of do experiments, and they, you know, or even quantum physics. Like it's like, is it a wave or a particle? Well, I don't know. It just depends on how you are looking at it. And so I kind of just I feel like I got into a situation where it was hard for me to grow if I was going to understand where I was growing. Like I just had to, you know what I mean? Grow. And so that to me was a disease. That's an extreme way to put it. But I mean, it was like, I just felt like it was productive for me when I wanted to try to make someone think that I was smart, but I don't really feel like a smart guy. So I don't need to, you know, like why pump up myself and make that posture if that's not really how I feel. So I don't think it was a disease that was useless. I would say that, you know, I think it was a necessity in my growth. I found that it was for my particular thing that I want to make art about. It became a little bit unproductive for me. Why are you taking it personally?
I'm aware that whatever we say here is going to make it onto Vimeo.
Okay. We can talk about it later.
Well, it's a question that's very alive for me in terms of how to direct this program.
Yeah.
And my own training was similar to yours.
Yeah.
If not more so.
Yeah, I bet more so.
You know, and this is a really different kind of art school.
Yeah, and I think people born after the 80s are just different anyway. They have a totally different concept and way of understanding the world. There's a different world too now. I mean, it's like it's not a good or bad thing. And I think it's a real challenge. I mean, I think art education must be a real tough challenge, because it's like, what do we know? You know, I mean, you're still developing, I'm still developing. It's like the whole thing is about development. But, you know, I just think, to me, my feeling was like, I may not have agreed with the ideology of the department, but at least it gave me, like, I needed them to have my view. You know what I mean? Like, in order for me to be like molten, I needed for them to be strict, you know? And so it's like, I didn't really dislike it while I was there. It just struck me later that it had created a pattern inside of me that felt unhealthy. Well, I'm colorblind, for one. And so my relationship to color is it's almost like, it's almost a lot of times really, what's the right word for it? Language-based. And so, yeah, like you're right, and to say that a tree is green, so it's green. Like I do that, but I think that's not to say I'm insensitive to color. I feel like almost more sensitive to color, but I don't see it the way that you probably see it. And so I'm red-green colorblind. And so a lot of times, like I think the reason why the work that I make is so brightly colored is because those are the hues that really, like, that I can see very well. If two colors are the same value next to each other, like a red and a green, I can't see the difference. But I think for me, like red is life and blood, and it's always has been in other cultures. Turquoise, like I really geek hard on Egyptian jewelry, and like all the materials that were available were special, and those colors were special because they were difficult to find. And so like I really love turquoise, and I think turquoise has like this great, it just gives me a great feeling, and I feel like it's expansive, and it's like water and life, and it's just all these things. And I think that like they use it a lot in Turkey, and even like Southwest, like I love all that Zuni stuff. And I don't know, like it's complicated. I can never explain color. Like a lot of my friends don't believe that I'm colorblind because I use so much color, and that but I can't explain, like it's, the only way that I can explain it is like when you look at a sunset, a normal person can maybe say, oh, I see like purple and, you know, periwinkle, or like all these names, but I can't make that differentiation. Some things look the same, like sometimes pink looks gray. But at the same time, I think as a person who's always been colorblind and has been making art almost my whole life, like I feel that I've had to work extra hard at it. And so I feel like I've gained so much respect for color that I feel like I know actually a lot about it. I can't use it the way other people use it. Is that it? Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.